about a point about inflation, as if somehow that would be predictive of election results. He doesn't look at the full economy, of course. Joe Biden has created more jobs than any other president. Unemployment is at a near record low. Employment is high. The stock market has reached new measures. If you're going to talk about the economy, you got to talk about it in a balanced way. And we do have objective keys, which he doesn't discuss on the short term and on the long term economy. He also claims, again,
And not to spend too much time here. It'll be an hour before we get through this video. But I think that's something that's interesting too. Is like the economy's really not that bad, but sentiment is bad for some reason. Like it feels bad, but it's not too bad actually.
No,
So
now that's where it's just like you're a finance guy, but I think unfortunately this could be a whole nother tangent, but I think a lot of people place the strength of the American economy on the market itself. And a lot of people don't understand that like your normal citizens, your middle class,
they don't own that many stocks.
right. They're not in the market, and that the market to me isn't it is one of the metrics that you can judge an economy by, but when you have, let's say, like 3% of Americans holding more than 60% of wealth, or have more than 60% of the wealth in America, which means they own more than 60% of the assets in America, the strength of the market or the strength of the economy is just letting me know that the rich are getting richer. And that's where like your normal people, as it relates to inflation especially, they are feeling it. And like you're just people are saying that the stock market is at new highs, new highs, new highs, and it's just like, well, I don't see that. Now that means corporations are making money. That means people are still going to have jobs. That means theoretically they companies should have more money to go and create new jobs. But in our system, and this could go deeper into economics, it's just like what these companies are doing largely isn't stimulating the economy. What you see now in America is you have companies doing buybacks
Yeah.
and big buybacks, and it's just like, and so it's like they're not using that money to invest in R&D, and it's just like I think, and that's a big
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of indicators that are not broad, right? Like you said, the
right,
stock market, um, even you could have misleading things like the employment rate. Like the employment rate is good, but if your wages aren't going up and prices are going up, then the fact that
right,
you're employed isn't really great. Now it's still
right,
better to being unemployed, right? So if we're going to
right,
compare to 2009 or whatever, then be grateful. But yeah, it's certainly you could have some suits on TV and say the economy is great, and then people are just like, for who? I don't I don't
right,
feel that.
right, and
So yeah, that is an interesting, and yeah, with the cost of housing and all of that, I think there's a and this I think there's a piece of this that comes back to the nostalgia of something like Trump's message with "Make America Great Again." There's especially when I talk to white folks, they'll be like, "Man, it was so great, my father's era where you don't have a degree, you just graduate high school, get a job, and that's enough to buy a house and support a
yep,
family and have a nice amount of land and a white picket fence. And today, you graduate high school and go to work, and with prices you can't afford to even live just because how the cost of housing and inflation." So they're like, it's way harder than it used to be. And so I could understand the sentiment being bad, even though our maybe the GDP growth and the stock prices and the employment rates, all of those metrics are objectively good, but it still doesn't feel good for folks.
and yeah, and it's just like I think, like if I'm not mistaken, I believe like the top five richest people in America, like I believe their wealth increased by like over $1 trillion, and like in the past year or
And
so.
in the past year or two, but them Trump tax cuts were good, man. It was like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
you
like
damn right.
35 to like
You
21% on the
damn right.
corporate tax. I'm like that's a good amount. And the thing is, I'm a finance person, so I know the equations. I know the equations for how you value companies. And when you cut taxes that much, the value of your company goes up a lot
Absolutely.
because it's not just like people may think, oh, it's if it goes from 35 to 21, well, that means next time you pay taxes, you'll save some money. And sure, that's true. But companies, the value of a company is not most of the value of the company is in predictions of what it's going to make in the future. And how long is the future? Well, the future is forever, right? So most of the money most of the value of a company is not in the assets it has today. The X, millions or billions of dollars they'll save in taxes next year isn't the point. It's the point that all the money they're going to make forever into the future is now that much higher because you cut the tax rate. And when you value a company, again, you're adding those future expected values up. Like if you're going to make, let's say your Apple, I don't even know the number, but let's say a random company, let's say you're going to make, $1 billion next year. It's like, okay, that's great. You made $1 billion. The taxes are going to reduce that amount, let's say to, 700, or something like that. Then it's like, okay, well, that's 700 grand you make. But then the next year you make another, let's say 800 grand, and then another, $1 million. Like, well, you got to add those values up, 700 plus 800 plus $1 million. Like, and because you're going to get those, you're going to get that money. And it's like all that future value gets added up. And then when you change the tax rate, all of those values get bigger instantly. Right. And yeah, so the value of your stock, which is the value of your company, shoots up when that tax rate changes. Now, it may not be exactly, I'm kind of oversimplifying a little bit, because that tax rate may not be consistent. There may be some other things that kind of go into the model, but still, like that's a huge boon for corporations, the people that own corporations, when you cut taxes that much.
And I think I think I think that's where Biden has well, now like it's going to be on Kamala's hands. But like when you're talking about Bidenomics, I don't think a lot of people really understand the market and our system and how we're affected. And they'll look at it and then they'll say things just like you said. They'll be like, the market is at an all time high, but I don't feel that in my pocket. When I go to the grocery store, the fruit and milk and all of that stuff seems to be 50% higher than what I paid last year, 2 years ago. And I don't feel how the economy is performing for me. But just like you said, corporations are at an all-time high. Stocks are at an all-time high. We're hitting records, and I don't think people aren't associating with that. People are just like,
Look, the economy's good if your money has a job. If your money got a job, then your money making good money.
right, but people just, but like and you absolutely right. But 60% of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency.
Right, they don't have it. Yeah, so
Right,
and
and,
that's the thing about being rich. It's like once you get rich, it's on the whole system's on your side, right? Like
right.
if you got $1 million and you make
It's
10% a year, then you're getting 100 grand for no reason other than
for
the fact
nothing.
that you got $1 million, right? Like it's
Yep.
and then you got 1.1 million, right? And then that makes even more money, and it just snowballs, right? Like if you got a lot of money, you just get more money automatically for doing absolutely nothing. And yeah, and then when you're broke, they charge you fees for not having money.
Yeah, and it's another symptom of another problem in America, which we may like discuss it later. But like, I think it's income inequality, and I know you're not like you don't too much care about the inequality as much as you care assuring the bottom, but
Right.
the inequality is. I think this is where people are going to start to understand, like in terms of the inequality, like when you're stating that the market is doing good and that's supposed to be a representation of my life, and I don't see that, then I think that's how that inequality is just like people are going to start to realize like, why do you have 100 million times more wealth than I could ever imagine? And I think like right now, I think we do have a problem. I'm a capitalist by heart, but I do think that we are doing some things wrong, and I don't think that the market hitting all record highs is going to be a good indication of the health, the economic health of like the middle class or just your average American. It's just
So
like,
here's where I'll agree with you. You can have a capitalistic system with capitalistic incentives that work without the incentives for capitalism being unlimited, right? Like it doesn't have to be unlimited to be
right,
capitalism. So you can still have
right,
taxes and progressive taxes and all other kinds of and regulations and things to and capitalism needs certain regulations so you don't end up with monopolies everywhere because that's the natural extension of a completely free market without regulations. You end up with monopolies and a bunch of corruption and stuff. But so yeah, capitalism doesn't need to be. I think there's like a lot of conservatives like, well, it's anti-capitalistic to have these progressive taxes or whatever. It's like no, like capitalism still works, when you have limits to the upside. You can still have capitalism. And I'm not talking about like a hard like wealth cap. I'm just talking about things like progressive taxes. So it doesn't need to be unlimited to like for capitalism to work. But as you mentioned, as you alluded to in the beginning, I'm not a big fan of worrying about inequality. If you all of a sudden had $3 billion, I ain't gonna be like, how come I don't have more? I'll be like, hey, congrats. I'm happy for you. So like, I'm not mad that rich people are rich. I'm upset when working people who are actually trying to make ends meet can't make ends meet, right?
Right.
And now the thing is, if you working and you can't make ends meet and you making bad decisions, then I don't really feel bad for you, right? Like if you working and then you got a gambling habit and then you broke, it's like, well, you stop gambling, right? Or if you got an expensive, car habit, you spend all your money on your car, like, well, that's kind of on you. But like if you're like actually responsible, you're not wasting money on expensive habits, you're not gambling, you're working full time, your spouse is working full time, and you still can't make ends meet, like we need to do something for those people. So I feel like if the bottom is like trying and they're doing it right and they still can't make it, that's when we really need to take care of folks and look to help out. But I'm not worried that Elon Musk exists. That doesn't really. I don't think that's a problem necessarily.
Yeah, like I'm not worried about that either, but I do think that the way wealth is being allocated should, just like you say, and that could be done through taxes, and how the government spends that taxes is how that money can be reallocated. But I think I think it becomes a problem, just like you said, when reasonable people can be driving and all of a sudden that car engine light comes on. And for 60% of Americans, that's going to be more than $500.
Yeah, but here's the
And
thing, though. Elon Musk ain't gonna fix that.
no, no,
Like
no, no,
even if we did have really high progressive taxes, you're still gonna have a poor people problem. So like I think when you look at like when you're looking to fix the actual problem, redistribution. There's so many people, right? Like sure, there's one Elon Musk that can take care of a good handful, but there's so many people that redistribution isn't really going to fix it. I think I'm more concerned about when you cut corporate tax rates and all that, like that's going to blow up the budget deficit, right? Because that's the government's revenue, right? And then if we cut our revenue, because a lot of money comes from corporations, like almost all of it, so I mean maybe not big corporations because there's still small businesses and stuff, but a lot of money comes from corporations, and you cut taxes that much, the government is making that much less money, which means you need to get that much more debt, right? Which just comes back to Republicans saying, "Oh, well, we're the party of conservatism and balanced budget." It's like, well, if you cut taxes and you don't cut spending, then you're not. And here's the thing: they say, well, they want to cut programs. It's like, yeah, but the biggest programs are like Social Security, and like Medicare,
right.
and they don't want to cut that, and that's almost everything. Like Social Security is huge, right? So it's like you say you want to cut entitlements, but the biggest one you don't want to touch, and they shouldn't touch. But then you're going to cut revenue, and then you're going to have more debt, right? So it's I'm more concerned about the debt than like thinking that redistribution is going to help poor people really.
No, I don't think it's redistribution alone. I think it would be more checks and balances on the capitalist system that we have now. I think you have to do checks and balances on mergers and acquisitions so that you're not creating monopolies, and that like and you have to allow labor unions to exist so people can fight for reasonable wages.
And we do have that stuff, right?
We do, but a lot of it is being, just like you said, for mergers and acquisitions. No, I don't think that we're doing a good job in America in terms of stopping monopolies from devouring industries in America. Is I think about 20 to 40 companies you could probably name would would probably be over majority of the industries that we have in America. And I don't think, like, I could probably name the 20, and then at that point every industry would likely be covered with those 20 companies. And I think that's where we have a problem. Where it's just like, I think we need to have checks and balances on monopolies or mergers and acquisitions, and allowing labor unions to exist because they're being fought. Like, not to say that they don't exist, but they're being. I think we need to have more leeway for labor unions to exist, give them a easier legal path, and then like things like a federal minimum, like livable wage, like things of that nature. I think is where we could do better in terms of like wealth redistribution and things of that nature. Like, I don't think you're just going to take from the rich and automatically give it to the poor, and that's going to solve the problem. But I think capitalism has some fractures, and it needs checks and balances. And I don't think that America is doing that, depending on, and it depends on the president. Just like you said, with Trump, you're going to get lower corporate rates. With Biden, we're going to want to raise them. So every 4 years, you're going to get something different, and that's the system that you're going to get. It's going to be turbulent. You're not going to get something consistent, and with that turbulence, that's going to be American lives. They're going to be up and down. And it's just like there's no consistency. And I think that's where most people are, where I think they're turbulent. There's no consistency. There's no stability in terms of their economic outlook. And I think most Americans have that sense of instability. And I think that's a problem, especially if you're trying to look at a system and see how this could effectively work for a population of people. It's just like right now, you could say that with the market being at an all-time high, that it's working and that it's healthy, but I don't think so. I think we need some checks and balances, and I think you start with monopolies, mergers, acquisitions. Then maybe you start looking at labor unions. Then you start looking at livable wages, and that's how you slowly eat away at that gap.
So here's my plan, and I haven't thought too much about this, so I'm just just thinking about this right now. Um, but for like economics, raising the minimum wage, that's something we have to do, over time, right? As inflation happens and things, we raise minimum wage. Problem with like something like a living wage, where you like really jump it like a lot, is you end up with good chance you end up with unemployment. Now, in some cases, the companies may not have a choice but to pay those higher prices, and you may not have unemployment. But in other cases, they're going to be like, all right, well, people are getting automated, or we're just not going to hire as much, or, it made sense to employ you at that rate, but at the living wage, we just can't justify it. So you might end up just with a bunch of unemployment. So you got to be careful about that, right? Because it is a market system. And people don't think about the labor market usually like normal people, but like there's a price of labor, the wage that you're going to make, and there's going to be certain demand for that labor and certain supply. So if I say, hey, I got a job paying $1 an hour, there's going to be very low demand for that job. If I got a job paying $20 an hour, a lot more demand for it, right? And if it's going to take $20 an hour, then who's going to supply that job? Well, a lot more people are going to supply jobs that if the job is $1 an hour, like they're paying, I don't say supplier jobs, I'm talking about like companies. They happily pay you $1 an hour, but they're not, fewer of them are going to pay 20. And that equilibrium where there's the same amount of people that are willing to work at a given rate that are willing to pay that given rate, that'll maximize the amount of jobs that exist. Now, that rate, when you have minimum wage, normally that rate would be lower than minimum wage. That's why you have minimum wage, because people
Right.
would be willing to work for lower than it, but
Right.
there's a minimum wage. So, that's kind of the going rate there. So you got to worry about unemployment. And again, whether or not and how much unemployment it will cause kind of depends on the company and the industry, but you still got to worry about that a little bit. My economic plan, I think a lot of issues, that people feel is related to just kind of the cost of living. And a big part of living is housing. So like, what if we had like a new, like pretty big government program that like, and I don't know, I'll need to check with experts about this, how feasible this is, but where we hire young men mostly, but women too, if they're interested, to go out and build houses, build like new. I know there's like, a lot of real estate based on location, but if we could find like places with like a good, at least a highway to get out there so you can get into the city or something, and just start building, affordable living with young people, young men, you just out of high school, maybe come work for the government, building low income houses, and you just flood the market with cheap housing, and then people got a place to live. And also the people building those houses, the young people have good jobs, and we can both be lowering the cost of living and giving Americans good, productive jobs at the same time. Or, something like that is a program we could do. And of course, if we can culturally, make folks take education more seriously, like China, right, where everybody over there is competing to actually, have skills, that could be good. And our problem with that is if everybody got educational skills, then the value of that goes down because you only need so many accountants and lawyers, right? So, that's where like a lot of the blue collar, like skilled blue collar jobs could be, really beneficial for a lot of young people too. So I'm kind of like on the side of a nice government program to get young people, or probably lean towards men, to get them skilled blue collar jobs, whether that's plumbing, electricians, again, building, housing, which lower cost of living for folks. That's kind of where I'm going on the policy side, and then hopefully culturally we can improve folks as well.
I'm there with you. Like so, I'm completely there with you, but I still think there are remnants in the capitalistic system that makes housing extremely ineffective. Like large corporations buying, like this is right now in America. The reason why housing is huge is because you have big companies, huge companies buying up properties, renting them, and then they're setting the market value for it. Like you have corporations buying up vacant homes. So like no one can exist in that market. And I think like to me that's where like you gotta have some limits. You gotta have some limits for these larger corporations. And it doesn't sound intrinsically capitalistic, but neither does too big to fail. Like, and especially as it relates to the financial system, when all the people with the money were getting bailed out because they were too big to fail. It's just like that doesn't sound intrinsically capitalistic, but Republicans were probably for it when their businesses were falling and they needed that. Like like, you know what I mean? So it's just like I'm like when it comes to actually doing something for the American people, it's just like, oh, that's not capitalistic. But when it's time to do something for corporations, it's like, oh, it's too big to fail.
Yeah, so socialism good when it bails you out.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's just like, and like, that's my problem. I'm right there with you. And like in general, I feel like housing hasn't been innovated. Like I think all other industries have innovation where housing hasn't. Now I do see it. I guess this could be shortly off topic, but I have seen where they're using like big 3D printers. Now this like isn't workers, unfortunately, but they're using big 3D printers, huge. I'm talking like almost like a small like a small building, almost building size 3D printer, and it's going around and it's laying cement and it's building the structure. And now like you can have homes that are built way faster, way sturdier, cheaper because they're only you're only using one source of material. But I think the housing market needs to be innovated, but you have to have reasonable regulations. That's another part of capitalism. Got to have limits. You got to have regulations so that these larger corporations are like, you know what? Okay, now that y'all got some cheaper housing, let me go and buy
Buy
them.
all the land.
Yep, yep. Let me go buy all of that shit. I'll lease it to you. I'll lease it to you. You can have it for 30 years or something like that, but you got to pay 70% more the price of what the value was a year ago. And I think like we gotta fix our system, and people are going to think, hey, that doesn't sound capitalistic, but generally speaking, we've been working against capitalism for the favor of the rich, and I don't know why we can't do it in favor of the middle class.
You mean like in terms of like bailouts and all
Right, in
that?
terms of bailouts and things of that nature. Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting point there.